I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm the foundation dietitian for the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois. I have been working with individuals living with chronic kidney disease for over a decade and then practicing a little bit longer than that. So it's exciting to be here in person. It's a little bit surreal. I am used to doing these over Zoom over the past year and a half. But we're going to continue the conversation. So I'm not here to lecture you. I'm really here to just have a conversation. And we'll have, time for questions or any comments that you have. But I was asked to talk a little bit about boosting your immune system with diet and immunity. And if you were here for the earlier presentation, there's a lot of overlap. And really a lot of that comes into play with the inflammation that is going on during that immune process. So we're going to do a high level talk on just some of the basics. As I said, I'm a dietitian. I'm not an immunologist or an infectious disease doctor. So just really high level. We'll talk about diet and then talk about some strategies to boost immunity. So let's start a little bit with how our immune system works. And I will say I have a dust allergy and I'm on a medication that also causes a dry cough. So if I cough, it is related to that. I'm not sick. So first we have our immune system. And, we know that our immune system helps us either fight off infections or to prevent infections from occurring in the first place. It can recognize foreign invaders. So we have bacteria and viruses. And then we have two types of immunity, innate and adaptive. So innate is kind of what we think of. They're just these natural things our body does, right? So we have mucus that traps pathogens. So there's a little bit about that in Dr. Phillips' presentation. The stomach acid, those can destroy pathogens as well. We have enzymes that help break things down. And then our immune system cells also can attack foreign cells entering the body. But then we have adaptive or acquired. And this is where things like vaccines come into play. It's where our body learns what substances are foreign substances, and it makes cells, those immune cells that our first presenter was talking about, to fight off these foreign invaders in our body. So our immune system is always adapting and changing and learning. But other things also trigger the immune system. So we talked a lot about inflammation earlier today. So if you're here for that presentation, and then all the presentations are recorded. So if you missed anything, you can always go back and watch them again. But inflammation is something that is triggered with the immune system. And it is a positive thing for a short amount of time. It's how our body heals and responds to foreign invaders. But that long-term inflammation that we see a lot with chronic diseases, that's where we have those problems over time, like where we have arthritis and heart disease and so forth. Autoimmune diseases. So this is kind of where your body starts to attack healthy cells. So it stops recognizing the non-healthy versus healthy, and it starts to just kind of self-attack its own cells. It's a hypersensitivity. There's also immunodeficiency disorders. So we probably commonly think of that with HIV and AIDS, but also cancers. And then there's antigens. So these are substances that are foreign and harmful and can trigger an immune cell activity. But what else? So obviously I'm a dietitian, and you're like, why are you talking about all this? Well, we know that poor diet, in addition to other factors, can play a role in immunity. So whether it might be setting you up to get over an illness faster or have more of a problem healing after an illness. So if anyone's on dialysis, you've probably been talked to about albumin. And we talk a lot about albumin, and you talk a lot about eating foods to boost albumin or just to, in general, to boost these things. And the reason for that is because we know that for people on dialysis, if they have a higher albumin level, it's actually protective against when they go to the hospital. It helps them heal quicker than someone who has a lower albumin level. So it's not so much that your nutrition is bad, it's really more related to how can we keep you as healthy as possible so if you do get sick, you can heal faster. But other things, older age, as we age, things aren't working as maybe they should. So we might make less bone marrow, we might have decreased hormones that play a role in producing immune cells. And a lot of times as we age, we start eating a little less. Foods don't taste as good as they used to, and it leads us up to a poor diet and nutrient deficiencies. We also have environmental toxins. So think of like smoking. We talk about perfumes in the anti-inflammatory presentation. So things that are in our environment that also can contribute. Excessive weight. So again, this goes to that inflammatory process. Chronic disease we talked about. Mental stress, lack of sleep and rest. So again, a little bit of a repeat. So if you were in that earlier one, these are all kind of the same things that are associated not just with inflammation, but also with immunity. So let's talk about our diet and how that plays a role in health and immunity. And I don't think it's earth shattering to say we want to eat foods that are as close from the farm as possible. So the farther apart we get from the foods as freshly picked from the farm, the more processed they are, the less amount of nutrients that they have in them. So, in terms of immunity, we want to make sure we have these whole minimally processed foods because they are full of micronutrients like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, iron, and so forth. And these are things that are needed in this immune process. They help our cells, they help the immune cells to develop and replicate, and they help our body process. So all these things that we're eating, they play a role, a really important role in our health, but also just in our immunity. The other thing to note is a lot of times people feel like, oh, if I take a lot of this one nutrient, that's going to protect me. But it all works together. So there's not a single nutrient individually, it's how everything works together. And then there are some diet patterns. So we'll talk through diet patterns, but there are diet patterns like the Mediterranean diet, which are naturally low or a natural anti inflammatory diet that are better at helping your body's natural immune defenses. So we had some examples. I have some very similar ones as well. So we have beta carotene. So it's a really powerful antioxidant. And antioxidants help to reduce the amount of inflammation in our body. And it also can boost the immune function by increasing disease fighting cells in the body. So really great sources are these like orange color foods, dark green foods. So sweet potatoes and carrots, dark green leafy vegetables, all these foods that are on the no list, right, for potassium for people living with chronic kidney disease. Vitamin C and E, also antioxidants, they help to destroy free radicals that support the body's natural immune response. So these are going to be our really bright pink and purples. If you had the fruit cup today in the continental breakfast box, they had beautiful berries and grapes in there. So really pretty reds and pinks. But things like bell peppers, nuts or seeds, broccoli, strawberries, these are all foods that are high in vitamin C or vitamin E. And then we go to vitamin D. So, a lot of times we supplement vitamin D. And also, as our kidneys are not working as well, we have a hard time converting the vitamin D that we get from the sun or our food into an active form of vitamin D. Our kidneys are involved in the process that converts an inactive form to an active form. Vitamin D from the sun, it's actually a hormone, even though we call it vitamin D. But vitamin D is associated with the risk of viral infections, respiratory infections, reducing pro-inflammatory compounds. So we want to make sure that we are including good sources of vitamin D foods in addition to getting a little bit of sunshine every day, if we can. And then zinc. I think you can see that. Okay, a little bit. This got a little messed up there. But zinc, you probably think of zinc and vitamin C when you have a cold. So I will say research has shown they don't necessarily prevent it. So if you're, you're just getting a cold, or you're thinking, oh, it's flu season, I'm gonna just take all of this vitamin C and zinc in high doses. I would caution against that. But if you do have a cold, there is some literature that says the course, like how long it goes and the severity does decrease when you have a little bit of vitamin C and zinc during the course of a cold. So zinc can help boost white blood cells, which are really what's fighting off some of the bacteria. So sources of zinc besides some of our protein foods like chicken, that's also really high in plant foods like seeds and nuts, beans, and lentils. And then selenium. So selenium is really affected by the amount of selenium in the dirt when our food is grown. But it is has attention because of its antioxidant properties, and then antioxidants protect cells from damage. So good sources are Brazil nuts. So you may or may not have been in a facility for dialysis where they may have trialed some Brazil nuts to give you as a supplement. There's a study that was looking really more at selenium content in Brazil, and they wanted to see about just supplementing selenium. But what they actually found was increasing with the selenium and the Brazil nuts that some patients had an increase in albumin levels. So I know some dialysis centers have utilized 1 or 2 Brazil nuts a day for some individuals if they have lower albumin levels. Will it work or not? It just always depends on the person, but that you may see something like that in a dialysis center. But other things like walnuts, fresh and saltwater fish like tuna or cod, and then poultry and grains. And then iron, I think we all think of iron in those I'm sorry, not plant, the animal-based foods, right? Like we think of steak or organ meat, but it's also in our plant foods as well. So things like spinach, sesame seeds, those sweet potatoes again. And the one thing we want to try to do is make sure that we can enhance the absorption of iron by including something that's high in vitamin C. So I think of something like beef stew. We have high iron in the beef, and then we pair it with some potatoes and tomatoes, which are both pretty high in vitamin C. So it helps to enhance that absorption of iron when you're eating that. Other things that will make it difficult to absorb iron would be eating an iron-rich food with something like tea or coffee, soy proteins, fiber. Those things can inhibit the iron absorption. So what are some other things that maybe we can think about? So garlic, flavoring your foods with garlic. And actually to activate garlic, you wanna make sure you've chopped it or smashed it. Eating a whole garlic actually doesn't have as much of a benefit as, and normally people aren't swallowing whole garlic, right? So, but if you're smashing it or chopping it, that kind of releases those sulfur containing compounds. That is a benefit for your immune system and inflammation. Ginger, turmeric, green tea, all of these have anti-inflammatory properties, which helps when you have sustained long-term inflammation if you're fighting off something. So we think of this food as medicine concept. Is chicken soup medicine, right? We think of chicken soup for the soul, or chicken soup is medicine. So there's no research that says everyone should be eating chicken soup when they're sick, but chicken soup has things that we've just talked about. It has protein, obviously, from the chicken and zinc. It has vitamins A with the carrots. It has vitamin C if you're doing anything like celery or onions. And then there's antioxidants in the onions and the herbs that are used in soup. Plus, if you're not feeling well or you're not eating enough, you can get dehydrated. That can also have some issues. So you have good hydration with the soup as well. So it could be thought of as a little bit of food for medicine. Now, should you take a supplement? So as I said earlier, poor diets, poor diet quality. So we're not really eating these great foods. Should we take a supplement? So it depends. If you're someone who's eating really well, you have a great balanced plate, you're getting in lots of fruits and veggies, you likely don't need to take a vitamin. But if you're in a high risk group, like someone with chronic kidney disease, specifically on dialysis, where we know that you're losing some of those water soluble vitamins when you have a treatment, it may be beneficial for you. So it really just depends. I generally take a food first approach. So we want to try to make sure that we enhance the quality of the diet and increase foods that have these great micronutrients in them. But if we're deficient in them, that's where supplements come into play. So we're going to talk about diet patterns, but I want to stop there and just see if anyone had any questions or comments before I do. Okay. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, Mateo's coming over with the mic. Thank you, Mateo. Oh, it's up there. Oh, you can sit. We'll bring a mic to you. Or you can stand if you want to stand. I feel that.
My question, well, comment primarily was, as we've seen with COVID, just some of the dietary patterns of the world. One of my favorites, of course, was green leafy vegetables. But right about the time COVID started, there was an outbreak of listeria.
Mm-hmm.
And right before that, there was some type of fungus with romaine lettuce. So, and it's always dicey because even the news was saying that, not to eat the lettuce that came in a bag, but to, check it prior to purchasing it from the store. So having said that, for somebody who's trying to do better, and most dietitians say you can eat as many green leafy vegetables as you want, as long as you don't overburden it with ranch or my favorite, blue cheese. You can consume as much green leafy vegetables as you want to. Is there any safety pattern per se for somebody who is suffering from chronic renal disease and trying to do better by eating better, promoting healthy eating by eating more salads and the leaner type of protein, your cods or your red snappers, which are also more expensive? I think we all can tell
Right.
as we go to the grocery store, especially coming up upon Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and definitely this, in terms of pricing too, we know the supply chain right now is disrupted, right? So it's taking longer to get things. Food has definitely gone up in price during this pandemic that we have all been living in. But it's a great question because food safety is often not a part of that conversation of nutrition. So obviously, when there are recalls, they do announce that, so you can find that. And I want to say the FDA also probably posts that on their website as well in terms of food recalls. So the highest risk group would be post-transplant. So that is the group after transplant. We usually talk a lot about food safety and really watching out for raw fruits and vegetables. And we also talk about washing, right? So you want to make sure you're washing any of the raw fruit, and that's not necessarily with like soap and water, but you're rinsing it under water. So same thing with like the green leafy vegetables. If you have something like a salad spinner, you can use that, or if not, just kind of putting it in like a colander and rinsing it out and making sure you've rinsed it really well. The same thing with any other like vegetable. If you're using like raw bell pepper or apples, something like that. And you can use a vegetable brush on the harder ones like melons and things like that to make sure you're scrubbing, I guess, on the skin with a brush. Again, just water. You don't need to use soap. But it's especially important before you cut into something like melon, because if there is something on the skin of the fruit and then you've chopped through it, now you've taken whatever is on the skin of that fruit and brought it to the flesh part that you're going to eat. So it's always just a good practice to make sure that you are washing your fruits and vegetables. And you don't necessarily need like a vegetable or fruit wash. I know they have those in the store, but just plain water, rinsing it, using a little bit of a brush helps. But same thing with lettuce. Then unless there's a recall, it is totally okay to eat, but we want to make sure that we are washing it off to at least decrease that risk of contamination and foodborne illness. But I would say caution, the highest would be that post-transplant, because food safety is such a concern in that group, because we want to make sure we minimize any risk of infection with that immune system being compromised. It's a great question. All right, so let's talk about dietary patterns that promote health. So let's first look at the ones that inhibit immunity, right? So we have diet patterns that lack variety and nutrients. There's ultra processed foods. They lack whole, minimally processed foods. They're high in refined sugars and high in red meat. And I say minimally processed because I think there's a common misconception about processed foods. If we pick an apple from a tree, we've processed an apple because we've taken it from the state. If we cut into it, it's processing. So we're minimally processing foods, as opposed to ultra processed foods. When we think of, a chicken breast that has now been ground down with other things and it's made into a patty and breaded and added salt, or we think of potatoes that have been made into potato chips or fries, things like that. So we want to try to take foods as whole as possible. And actually, an apple juice is a really good example of that, right? So if you have an apple from the tree, that would be your whole food. Maybe you've processed it into an apple sauce, and then we further processed it into juice, right? So this would be the most processed for the apple versus that whole apple coming from the tree. So we just want to try to get things as close as they were, like I said, to the farm, or as close as they were in nature, just to get the most micronutrients. And so this ultra processed diet and lack of variety of nutrients can also sometimes, go along with the standard American diet if someone is consuming a lot of processed foods and things like that in the grocery store. But there's obviously things within our diet as well that we cook, and it's not necessarily ultra processed. But when we have a diet that's really highly refined, it affects our gut microbiome. So again, in that earlier presentation, it was mentioned that our immune system, there's a lot of immune system reactions that are happening and occurring within our guts and our intestines in particular. And we have we have trillions of little microorganisms living in our intestinal tract, and we have a balance. We have good ones and not so great ones. And the food that we eat really determines how many good ones we have and how many bad ones that we have in our gut. And so if we have foods that are high in fiber, and we have a lot more plants and fruits and vegetables and whole grains, these are all things that are beneficial to those good bacteria in our gut versus things like candy bars and potato chips and things like that. Goodbye. And other things that may be beneficial are probiotics and prebiotics. You probably have heard about these, and these are talked about a lot for gut health. So what do we mean by this? And I apologize that these are very busy slides. So for probiotics, they're different. So probiotics are live organisms that confer a health benefit on the host. So what the heck does that mean? It just means that these are organisms that when we eat them, they probably have a benefit to us, as we are now the host for this organism in our GI tract. A lot of times they can include yeast, but they're a lot of times in fermented foods. So if we think about miso, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, these are foods that are all pretty high in probiotics. They can also be a little high in salt. So that's something to kind of pay attention and watch out for. You can make them from scratch in terms of like sauerkraut and fermented vegetables with less salt in them. Prebiotics are the food or the fuel for these healthy bacteria in our gut. And so those foods are things like garlic and onions, which we already mentioned as being great for immunity. They're also in things like our fiber-rich foods, and we have something called resistant starch in bananas. So asparagus, bananas, artichokes, seaweed, things like that are all these great fiber and great fuel source for these healthy bacteria in our gut. So when we think about then what is going to promote our gut health, what is good for healthy eating, what is a good dietary pattern? So this is from Harvard. It's Harvard's version of healthy eating plate. It's very similar to the USDA's MyPlate, which you're probably familiar with. But what we want to do is we want to make half of our plates at least have fruits and vegetables. And you'll notice on here that we have a larger portion of vegetable than fruit. If you look at the MyPlate from the USDA, it just kind of says half the plate's fruits and veggies. But we do want to try to get a little bit more vegetables than fruit on our plate. And part of that is just for the carbohydrate management if you're someone that has diabetes. So we want to just make sure that we're having a good balance of that. The other side should be a mix of protein and grains. And so a lot of times if we think about what is kind of our standard American plate, right? The vegetable side is probably the protein side that we're used to eating. The fruit side is maybe the vegetable side. And then the other side is probably full of starch, right? That's probably what we're typically used to eating in that standard kind of American plate. And so we kind of want to just flip it. And we kind of want to think of, well, how can we just flip that to make our vegetables and fruits a little bit more prominent? When people talk about things like a plant-forward or plant-based diet, it doesn't mean that you have to be a vegan or a vegetarian, but it is really kind of making fruits and vegetables that star or the main part of your plate, and then things like starches and proteins a little less of a player. You'll also notice on the plate, there's something called stay active. And that's just to remind people to get in exercise. So you want to try to get in exercise every day if you can, but you want to stay active. And then you want to make sure you're drinking water. You could do tea or coffee, but we want to limit how much sugar is in it. And then in terms of dairy, which is interesting, they do recommend 1 or 2 servings a day for dairy, and that's the same that we'll see in the Mediterranean diet pattern. So, and I know before was talking about with the inflammation, and we was talking about, let's get rid of gluten, let's get rid of dairy. But I do want to say that things like the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, all of them do include dairy, and they've all been found to be anti-inflammatory diet patterns. So not everyone is going to be affected by things like gluten and dairy. So it's just like your kidney diet. Not everyone has to be on a low potassium diet. So it's really individualized to whatever is going on with you. And this is just kind of their key messages. The type of carbohydrate's more important than the amount of carbohydrate. They also don't give you a specific number of fat to hit in the day, but just to choose healthier fats. So that's like olive oil, canola, avocado oils, things like that. Or nuts or seeds, walnuts, whole walnuts. And then they also talk about avoiding sugary beverages. So if you look at the DASH plate, it's very similar. And the DASH is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This diet, along with the Mediterranean diet, is often recommended for individuals in the earlier stages of kidney disease to help them manage high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. But the same kind of common theme, we have more of a focus on plants on the plate, less of a focus on protein and grains. And then when we go to the Mediterranean diet, this is talking about per day, not per meal, the 6 to 8 glasses of water a day, 4+ servings of fruits and vegetables, 2+ servings of whole grains, 1 to 2 servings of nuts or seeds, 1 serving of fish, poultry, egg, red meat or legumes, a serving of heart healthy oil, and less often red meat 0 to twice in a week. Same thing with sweets, glass of wine optional. So in the dietary guidelines, it's recommended, women can have 1 glass, men 2 glasses of wine a day. In the Mediterranean diet, it's a half a glass to 1 for women and 1 or 2 for men. So slightly different. But again, the Mediterranean diet also includes 2 servings of low fat or even non-fat dairy with your meal plan. So we also want to make physical activity key in the Mediterranean diet, and we're thinking plant forward, right? So we want more plants on our plate. We're choosing our whole grains, that fish and seafood, like we talked about, meats and sweets are less often, and then we want to make sure we have enough water. The other thing that's interesting on this one too is talking about connecting with family, getting enough sleep. So there are studies that look at these so-called blue zones. And blue zones are areas where they have the longest living individuals. And there's some commonalities amongst all of them. They're more of a plant-based diet. Some are vegetarian, some are not. They also have a lot of daily physical activity. But the other commonality is that there's connection and spirituality within that, less stress, or at least better stress management. And so it's not just the foods that we're eating, but sometimes it's the lifestyle that we're living and the people that we have surrounded us with, and just even our own spiritual beliefs that can actually play a role as well in our health and immunity. And you're like, great, that's great, Melissa, but I'm on kidney disease and I've looked online and I've been given food lists of foods that say I have to avoid all these foods that you just told me are good for me to eat. And so what I pulled up here, these are every like 10 years or so, they have updates to our practice guidelines. And so in 2020, we had an update to the guidelines for nutrition practice for individuals with chronic kidney disease. And I pulled out the statements on dietary patterns. So one is that in adults on non-dialysis CKD and in post-transplant, with or without high cholesterol, that a Mediterranean diet is recommended as a healthful diet pattern. And then in adults with stages 1 through 4, to prescribe increased fruit and vegetable intake to decrease body weight, help with blood pressure control. And it also reduces the amount of uremia, which is that inflammation that is occurring within your body when your kidneys aren't able to filter and produce enough urine. So you'll see that fruits and vegetables and plants are really being recommended and brought to the forefront in our kidney diets now, where before we really were kind of very low fiber, very restrictive on the foods that we were choosing. And I think ultimately we were setting our patients up for having more inflammation and more problems because we weren't focusing on a healthful diet pattern. But wait, there's more. So this is called the plant-dominant low-protein diet. So this is specifically for individuals that are not on dialysis. So for those that are not on dialysis and not post-transplant, we typically recommend protein a little less than the general recommendation. It's been found to be a little bit more protective for the kidneys. But what they did in the study is they found that having that lower protein diet, but that 50% of the foods on the plate come from plant sources along with your protein foods, limiting sodium. So these are higher sodium recommendations than we typically do. We usually do about 2,300 milligrams or 1,500 for some with high blood pressure or a lot of fluid gains. High fiber, so those are our whole grains we've been told not to eat. And then regular calorie levels. But what they found with this is there was less malnutrition. There was slower progression of kidney disease. There was less uremia. So that would mean there's less waste products, less nausea, less vomiting. And overall, it was really good for the patients. So again, just to say that we want to continue to encourage plants and vegetables and to stop restricting them. So what if you're on dialysis? So again, we still want to make at least half of our grain choices in a day whole grains, continue using less salt. We typically will have more protein when we get on dialysis. And a lot of that, again, we talked a little bit earlier about keeping our albumin levels up and being healthy for keeping ourselves able to fight off infections. But we also lose some protein when we do our dialysis treatment. So just like when we do a dialysis treatment, we lose some of our micronutrients, we lose some protein as well. So we typically recommend a little bit more protein for individuals on dialysis. We still want to limit our high phosphorus foods, particularly phosphorus additives. Those are usually the ones that I start with, as opposed to restricting the foods that are naturally occurring in phosphorus. And we still want to go for at least 5 servings of fruits and veggies a day, and a serving is about a half a cup. We watch our fluids, and a lot of patients may need to take a renal specific vitamin. They're very specific in terms of what's in them versus your over-the-counter multivitamins, because they're just focusing on those water solubles that you're losing during treatment. So this was really busy, but this was a graphic that was just showing how the MyPlate from the USDA can be adapted for someone on dialysis. So it is, the main point of me putting this in here was just to show you that you can still follow a MyPlate type of way of making your plate and diet pattern, even if you are on dialysis. So the last few slides before we go into any questions or discussion, it's just kind of the thinking of, what can we do for a healthy immune system? So we've talked a lot about eating a balanced diet with whole fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, and healthy fats. And if you're finding that it's struggle to eat or you're having a hard time eating, talk with your provider about taking a multivitamin. If you're smoking, stop smoking or do not start smoking. That's some of those environmental triggers. Drinking alcohol in moderation. So if you don't drink alcohol, don't start. But if you are drinking alcohol, we want to make sure that we're moderating the amount that we're drinking. We want to make sure you're exercising regularly. And, if it's something that maybe you need help getting back into, or you're not feeling as strong, you can always ask to start with a physical therapy evaluation just to see if you need to strengthen any muscles to get yourself back into exercising. And sleep and stress management are so important for inflammation and your immune system. So making sure you're getting at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. And it helps to have some sort of sleep hygiene or sleep routine. So going to bed around the same time every night, stopping devices after it gets dark out because of that blue light kind of keeps our brains wired and awake. You might be taking a bath every night before bed, just something to start calming yourself down and get ready for sleep. Same with managing stress. So we talk about connection. Sometimes connecting with a friend can help manage stress, or meditation, things like that. And then we've been talked to death about washing our hands and masking up, but those are still very important things. So in summary, we have 2 types of immunity that we talked about. Innate, so that's kind of like our more natural body processes, like the mucus, even our skin, which is our largest organ, is the first line of defense against any type of foreign invaders, or adaptive or acquired. And that's when our body learns, after coming in contact with something that it shouldn't, to replicate and make immune cells to fight against it. We know that diets that are poor in quality can be linked to poor immunity and increased inflammation. And then a lot of the foods and the micronutrients in those foods are what helps your body to produce an immune response. And that's things like beta-carotene, vitamin C, E and D, zinc, selenium, iron. Pro and prebiotics can help boost that healthy amount of microbes in your gut. And then we want to choose diets that are plant forward, minimally processed, to boost immunity. And I do want to say that it doesn't mean you have to choose organic food. I know there was a lot about organic food before, and I'm not pro or con organic food. A lot of it comes down to what's available to you, what is in your budget, right? So frozen food, for instance, is typically fresh. That's just flash frozen at the time of harvest, and it goes into the freezer. Now, unless it has been added with salt or a cheese sauce or something like that, it's typically equal to a fresh fruit or vegetable. So I don't want to scare you. I am always the anti-scare of our food. We want to eat and enjoy our foods, and we want to do whatever is available to us. I would rather someone eat an apple than grab a bag of chips, because that apple is going to be better for us, even if it's not organic. And then again, that plant-forward Mediterranean diet is appropriate for kidney disease. So it's a lot on the news. You've heard a lot about it, but it's recommended, and it is definitely appropriate for those with kidney disease. I'm going to stop there and see if we have questions. And I know lunches should be out here pretty soon. Yes.
Doctor will ask, oh, thank you. So every time I go to the transplant center, the doctor will ask, how much water are you drinking? And I'll say, well, 8-ounce glasses. And that's not enough. You need to drink probably 12 8-ounce glasses. So then I'll go to the transplant center at the next appointment, and they'll say, how much are you drinking? Okay, well, I'm drinking 8-10 ounces of water. And oh, that's not enough. You better up it to half a gallon. And then the next appointment, a gallon. The next appointment, gallon and a half of water. They always want more. But after a certain point, you kind of reach a limit on water. And I was just wondering, I've seen, I think they call them water supplements, where you could squeeze the bottle and put it into water and stir it up. And now they have sodas that are 0 sugar, What's your thought on those? I mean, are they healthy? Stay away from them? What?
Yeah, so the kidneys love being hydrated. That's why they're always pushing a lot of fluid. And things other than water counted fluid. So coffee, tea, all of that could count as fluid. You can even use like those sparkling waters. I don't know if that's what you're alluding to. If you're thinking like a zero sugar, like a Sprite Zero or something like that.
Right.
Generally, those are fine. They do have like a sugar alcohol in those usually. So you always want to be mindful of how much sugar alcohols that you have, because that actually can cause some GI upset. And it may or may not disrupt your microbiome. So in smaller amounts is totally fine to have. I would say make the most of your choices, like water or tea or coffee that's not flavored with sugar. And then you can add in some other beverages as well to make that a little fun. You can even do something where you mix like a sparkling water with like a little bit of juice or something like that, just to give you a little variety and something fun. Things like soup, that counts as fluids as well. If you have something like a frozen popsicle, that also counts as fluids. So there's things other than water that would also count for your fluid. But you definitely want to make sure that you are drinking a lot though, to keep that kidney working well and really well hydrated. Yeah, so those should be fine, just in smaller amounts.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for your talk. It was really informative. Just following up with his comment, I was told there's limited amount of fluids that you can drink. So it seems contradicting, because I would think that if you drink fluids, it's good for the kidneys, just like you just mentioned right now. But I've heard comments, or I've heard saying that basically they're limited to, I think, 32 ounces or 32 to 40 ounces. So which one is it? Do you want to drink more, or do you want to drink less?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on your stage of kidney disease. So if you're someone that's on dialysis, typically you're producing very little to no urine whatsoever. And there's really no way for your body to get rid of all this extra fluid. We get rid of some of the fluids through, like, when we exhale, we have a little bit of like fluid that kind of comes out. We don't really see it, but there's some droplets or how we're sweating. But generally, we're not eliminating enough fluid. So for someone on dialysis, we're pretty careful on how much they drink, because your kidneys are working 24/7. When you go on at least 3 times a week in center, if you're on a peritoneal dialysis or daily home dialysis, it's a little different. But if you're doing traditional in center 3 times a week, that means you're only getting 12 hours of kidney function from that external kidney with the machine versus that 24/7. So too much fluid can then build up in the tissues, particularly around your heart. You'll have swelling, you'll have difficulty breathing, things like that. So we're very mindful of how much you're consuming if your urine production is decreased. So if you're in stages like 1, 2, or 3, you're probably not restricted in fluids, even 4. But when we start having less and less urine production, we start to get concerned of too much fluid. So it's both. It just really depends where you're at on that kidney spectrum.
I just wanted to make a comment on that. I've been on dialysis now for 15 years, and I don't make any pee. I haven't peed in over 10 years. So right now, 32 to 40 works for me, because if I drink over that, then I find myself fluid overloaded. It comes down to my ankles and everywhere. It goes everywhere. And then I find myself hard breathing, can't hardly move. So optimally, that works for me, but I'm at the end stage of the kidney disease. So, and like I say, I don't make urine, so that works for me. But if you can drink water and you can pee, maybe you could take a little more, but you have to find your own balance for yourself. It took me a while to learn this, because at first I was in and out of the hospital, in and out every other month. And I had to get myself to a point where now I'm not going, it's much more balanced for me, but everybody is on a different level. So you have to find your own balance. And I want to say,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And that's absolutely right. So, you know, part of that fluid is that difficulty breathing, but the other part too is it's harder for that dialysis machine to get the fluid off of you as well. So that's harder on your heart. It's just harder on you. Can feel more cramping and things like that during treatment. So, thank you.
I kind of didn't know that you could drink too much water, but my husband's sodium levels were very low last time. I mean, he avoids sodium in his food and all that. He's had a transplant, and knock wood, he's doing good, but his sodium levels were low in the blood work. So his doctor told him to reduce the amount of water he was drinking instead of increasing the sodium, increasing the salt. So I didn't quite understand what the connection was.
Yes, we definitely can overhydrate. And then when we do that, we dilute a lot of the just our different lab work and things within our blood. So it really can affect that fluid balance and, you know, dehydration or overhydration. So both are a problem. Like anything in life, right? If we overeat something or overdo something, it's not good for us. So there is a little bit of a balance in that. But yeah, that's absolutely right. When we have too much water, it can drop our sodium, and we need a lot of these things to kind of balance the blood pressure and the fluid in our body. So everything's kind of working together to maintain, you know, where our bodies are at. So yeah, no, drinking a little less fluid definitely would resolve that. Yeah, but if you're drinking too much fluid, that's the issue, not the salt intake. So you want to back off on that, resolve that. And then if it's still low, we're doing that, okay, then maybe we have to do the salt, but likely it's just from the fluid. Okay. Maybe one more question. We have lunch and we have trivia if you stay around. I saw some more hands. Any other questions or are they comments?
one more thing that I found, that what I discovered was that when I drank other things like tea or pop or even juice, or I always had a thirst. I ended up having a thirst for water because it didn't really hydrate me. It made me more thirsty. So what I do now is I focus more on water and not the other things, the juice, the this, the that. I drink some of that, but I've limited and drink more water than anything because I'm limited in my fluids. So I thought I would suggest that, say that.
Yeah, no, great. And things like sugar, we always think of salt makes us thirsty, but actually a lot of sugars make us thirsty too. So if we're drinking a lot of beverages that have high sugars in them, it'll actually make us thirsty. And I know we're time for lunch. People are coming in. Is there one more question? All right. Well, thank you so much for being an attentive audience, and thank you for your questions.